gentlemen, happy holidays. For those of you celebrating Hanukkah, happy Hanukkah, and for those celebrating Christmas, it's coming up in a week. And I had the experience of losing a very dear friend last week, so I thought I would do another piece on healing loss of a loved one, healing the death of a loved one with gratitude. The tendency right away is, once the dust is settled and the person who's lost that loved one, all the other practical things are out of the way, and the times of quiet and alone time, is to really feel the sadness and feel the contracted feeling, the negative feelings. And as you see back here again, the chart here with the heart. Because we care, because we love, we are subject to having pain. I remember one time I was sitting in a doctor's office waiting for a friend, and I had these two sentences come to me. We suffer because we love. This is unavoidable. We suffer more because we deny the reality of love. This is avoidable. And by the reality of love, I mean that love is the underlying ground of reality. It's part of consciousness, an element of consciousness, and or it is consciousness, really. Consciousness, love, peace, and joy are all part of consciousness, aside from the body mind. And so we want to try to return to a loving place whenever anger and fear and sadness come up for the loss of the death of a loved one. I told two stories, and I'll repeat these stories from an earlier YouTube where I put on healing loss of a love, but I tacked it onto another piece about the brain basis for the 4 inner steps for dealing with stress. Okay, so what that involves was I was sitting with some 80-year-olds. There was two 80-year-olds that had just lost their spouses of 50 years, and they become kind of buddies, and they were seeing each other, but they weren't trying to replace the spouse, and they were having good times and so forth. In fact, they even allowed the other to make a mistake and call them by the name of the deceased spouse from time to time. They had that going. And in the same room, seated opposite them, was a woman who had lost her husband some 20 years earlier. And she was deeply in love with him. And I remember her telling me when she went through World War II and with the other wives, whenever the Postman would pull up, their hearts would beat wildly, and they would be full of anxiety about whether or not their serviceman was still alive. And so whenever she saw the Postman came up, even to that day, and she was then in her late 70s, she would feel her heartbeat. It was a conditioned response. The Postman equaled possible bad news. And her husband came home. They raised 4 kids and had a wonderful life. But she, as she was sitting there with the other two who had lost their loved ones after 50 years, their spouse, she said, she bent over, contracted, and said, "I'll never stop missing him." And I said to her, "Now, Mary, lean forward for a second, take a deep breath, and say, 'I'll never stop missing you.'" Say it directly to Carl, the man you lost, your love of your life. "Carl, I'll never stop missing you. And that's because," and almost taking your hands in to your chest, "I'll never stop loving you." And then reaching up, expanding, opening the chest area, the heart area. And that's because I'll never stop loving you. So check it out in your own body, the idea of saying, "I'll never stop missing you. And that's because," and leaning back, "I'll never stop loving you." See the difference in your body with the wording from missing, contracted, sad, to "I'll never stop loving you." And that's because, and then remember, I'll never forget, I'll always remember the time we did this, we did that. And really just let yourself go through a litany of those things that you remembered enjoying and loving doing together. Now, the other story was I was on a Jan Levan Sant show after 9/11 and after World Trade Center tragedy and the attack on the Pentagon and in Shanksville, the plane going down. I was there to talk about how to talk to your children about 9/11. And seated next to me was a man who left the audience and went up on stage with his mother and sister. And they were both feeling that it was now Sunday and the 9/11 happened on Tuesday, and they had no hope that for this woman, she didn't think her husband was coming home, and the daughter didn't think her father was going to make it. But Stephen, the son, was holding out hope. Now, when he came back and sat down next to me, I said to him, Stephen, you're never going to stop loving your father. And because you're always going to love him, hence see the heart with anger, fear, sadness, depression, all coming out of that ground of caring. I said, you're going to find times where you'll be sad, mad, depressed, whatever. And when that happens, I want you to picture your father, and whether you do this silently or out loud, picture him and talk directly to him. It's very important to talk directly to the deceased loved one and say, my feeling sad, anger, depression is telling me, again, I hate it that you're not here with me, and that's because I would love it if you were here with me. And he had a ritual of having pizza and Pepsi with his father, who was a first responder, on Sunday nights. He really looked forward to that. And he was a young man in his 20s, and he and his father would have these moments. And so I said, okay, whenever you feel that sadness, my sadness is telling me, or my anger is telling me, I hate it that you're not here to have pizza and Pepsi with me on Sunday nights. And that's because I loved it when we had pizza and Pepsi on Sunday nights. I can remember, and then put in a list. I can remember doing this that I love doing you. I remember doing this other thing I love doing with you. And then just really let yourself feel fully the basis, the ground of reality out of which the loss comes, which is the love, which is what you valued, what you treasured. And go back into speaking that, what you treasured. I really treasured these times, that time, and so forth. So the key is to return to love. And that's why the name of the book was, 8 Steps to Love, 4 inner steps for stress, 4 outer steps for conflict. But 8 steps to love, how to return to love when you need it the most, the moment stress and conflict begin. And so this is one of the biggest stresses in your life, the loss and the death of a loved one. And so that key is going in, feel the contracted emotion, the negative emotions are contracted, and love is an expansive energy and peaceful power that you can access. And that's the reality of love. When we deny that reality, that's when we suffer more. And we can't help that we're going to have some suffering because we love somebody and we lost them. And as the heart shows, anger, fear, sadness, depression all come from the fact that at the core we love. We're loving beings. Now I remember there was a interesting mythological story. I think it was a Roman mythology-based thing that I read in Rollo May's book years ago, Love and Will, the psychoanalyst Rollo May. And in it, it talked about one day Care, as this character was walking by a river and picked up some clay and started to fashion it into something. And she fashioned it into a human being. And then she thought, geez, Jupiter, will you give this spirit? And he did. And so she was thinking, now, what should happen when this being dies? What should I do? What should I name this being? And so Saturn became the arbiter of the discussion between Earth and Jupiter. So the way it was resolved was, okay, since the body came from the Earth, the body shall go back to the Earth. And since the spirit came from Jupiter, the spirit will go back to Jupiter. But through all the days of its life, Care will be carrying it through all those days of its life. It will have charge of this human being, and the name of it will be from humus, earth, hence Homo Man. And so that's how she named it, and that's what the decision was for its thing. But care shall follow it, shall carry it all the days of its life. And so that's us. That in the Danish word sorg, at the core of us is that sorg, that caring, that love. And so if you notice in your body when you do the difference between I'll never stop missing you, and that's because I'll always love you. Now, one other thing that's very crucial is most of the time when we're in a negative contracted place, we're saying more or less, I hate it that you're not here with me. I hate it that I didn't have more time with you. And I would advocate you saying to yourself, I hate that I didn't have more time with you. And that's because I would love to have more time with you to do this, that, and the other thing. Again, so it's going to happen. It's going to come up. It doesn't happen in one shot, like one, I hate it that you're not here, and that's because I'd love it if you're here. It'll happen. You'll work through that way. But the shifting back to gratitude and remembering that key thing, I hate it that I didn't have more time with you, and that's because I would love to have had more time with you. Why? Because I loved this, that, and the other thing. So you keep filling in the blank. Again, core is the problem is not accepting that you're not going to have more time with a person. And you might as well give full expression to that negative emotion. Give full expression, create the vacuum. I hate I'm not going to have more time with you. And then as you exhale, and that's because I would love to have more time with you. And why is that? Because I love this, that, and the other thing. So focusing on what you love really will help heal the loss with the gratitude for all those times you had that you loved. It's like taking out a wonderful album every time you go through those steps. I hate that you're not here with me, and that's because I would love if you were here with me. I remember this, that, and the other thing. So that's sort of the core of it. And you can find more about that in my book in the link below to 8 Steps to Love. So have a great week, and I'll see you next week on Christmas Eve.